When Michael Turner came back after 8 years missing in a war zone, he wasn't looking for a parade or a crowd cheering his name. All he wanted was to see the old house again, the white wedding dress he once placed in Claire's hands, and maybe hold on to a memory that hadn't yet slipped away. But up in the dusty attic, the dress he found wasn't his, not the one Claire wore when they swore they'd weather every storm together. This one was new. This one carried no trace of their past. And the picture frame on the wall, it no longer had his face in it. So who had taken his place in the life that used to be his? And why did that new wedding dress have a faint red dust clinging to the hem, like some part of the truth in that house hadn't yet been washed clean? The truck jolted to a stop on the rutted dirt road. Michael hit the brake. The engine coughed, then went quiet. A heavy silence fell over him. Out in the war zone, that kind of silence usually meant bullets were about to fly. Here, in this small town, it was proof enough that the life he once knew had long since slipped away. In front of him stood the house that had carried his childhood. The porch sagged like it was ready to give. The windows were boarded, shadows filling the rooms behind them. Michael gripped the strap of his pack, heart beating off rhythm. This is my home, he kept telling himself, but all his eyes saw was a place that no longer recognized him, no longer reaching out its arms to welcome him back. He stepped onto the porch. The old door gave way under his hand. Damp, stale air rushed into his nose, the smell of dust and years left behind. Michael dropped his pack to the floor and walked into the bare hallway. On the wall, where his wedding photo with Claire had once hung, there was only a faint stain. He froze. No knife, no gun, but that blank space cut him open deeper than any wound. The living room sat quiet. He brushed his fingers over the fireplace ledge. A thick coat of dust lay there, except for a clean circle, the mark where a frame used to rest. That frame had held a picture of Claire in her simple lace dress, her smile shining like sunlight. Now there was only dust and a hollow space that chilled him. Michael climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. As a kid, that sound had been his welcome song when he raced to his room. Now it echoed like a reminder. The man who returned no longer fit under this roof. He pushed the door open. The last of the daylight spilled in, curtains shifting in the breeze. The bed was neat, the pillows squared, the whole place scrubbed clean like some hotel room without a soul. Then he noticed the wardrobe door cracked open. His heart stalled. Hanging inside was a wedding dress. Michael walked toward it. Slow, careful steps. The gown was spotless, the silk shining smooth, the pleats crisp. It was expensive, elegant, nothing like the modest dress he had once scraped together money for. Back when he was just a young soldier, in his memory, Claire had been breathtaking in that old lace, her hand trembling in his at the altar, her hair carrying the scent of wildflowers. This new dress felt cold, as if it had been brought here to erase all of that. His hand shook as he touched the fabric. It was icy to the skin. Memories surged, then fell away under the weight of what stood in front of him. He opened the wardrobe wider, searching for the old dress. Nothing. Only this one, standing proud, claiming the space as its own. He searched the folds, and his fingers hit something hard in the pocket. A card. Cream-colored paper. Neat lettering. Wedding ceremony at Cole Estate. The groom's name had been torn off. Michael stood there, numb. Claire, her name hammered through his mind. The image of her colliding with the bold print. He swallowed, throat dry as sand. His heart thumped like it was trying to punch through his ribs. The room suddenly felt too tight. No air left for him. A draft slipped in, and the dress swayed. The hem brushed his arm so cold it raised goosebumps. Michael jerked back, feeling like a ghost wandering through someone else's life. He looked around, desperate for something, anything that tied this space back to him. A frame, a blanket, some proof he once belonged. But the room stayed silent, stubborn in its denial. The light outside drained away. Shadows pressed in. Michael still stood there, one hand gripping the card, The other clawed against the wardrobe's edge. Every dream he had carried through the battlefield, the reunion, Claire's arms. The warmth of their home was dust, now. Then he heard it. A faint sound from the porch. The boards creaked. The careful step of someone moving close. Michael's body snapped alert. He turned. Eyes locked on the doorway. His heart raced. Fear. Hope. The edge of combat tension all surged at once. Could it be Claire, or someone else who had stepped into her life? Her house. Her room, the place he thought was his forever. Michael stayed frozen. Waiting. And in that stillness, he realized the truth. The ones who leave dream of coming home. But the ones who stay don't stand still waiting. A door was opening. And Michael knew whatever happened next, he would never be the same man again. Under the dim light of a dusty ceiling lamp, Michael slid the wardrobe door to the right. A narrow gap opened behind the winter coats and a few dresses Claire had left behind. He crouched down, running his hand along the wooden boards until his fingers hit the corner of an old box. It sat pushed all the way back, thick with dust and cobwebs. That little oak box, he remembered it well. He had placed it there himself one June night after the wedding. Inside had been the old lace dress, a letter he'd written to Claire the first day they moved in together, and the train ticket for the trip they never took. He pulled the box out and brushed the dust off with his sleeve. The surface was scratched. The iron clasp rusted. But the carved initials on the lid were still there, a small C and M entwined. Something tightened in his chest. He snapped the lock open. The heavy click sounded like the end of something he couldn't quite name. He lifted the lid and looked inside. Empty. No dress. No letter. Nothing but a thin layer of ash covering the bottom. Michael sank down hard, clutching the edge of the box. His palms came away, smeared with ash. The grey dust settling into the lines of his hands like a stain he'd never wash off. He didn't know what he had hoped for, maybe just a scrap of fabric, maybe her handwriting. But it was gone. All of it. Only this cold emptiness. Like someone had been working piece by piece to erase him from his own life, reaching deeper. His fingers struck something hard wedged between the bottom boards. He pried it loose. A corner of paper peeked up. Michael pulled it free. A pale yellow envelope. The seal cracked open. He turned it over, and the bold black print stopped him cold. Notification of death. Michael Turner. Ender 1. His hands shook. He staggered back toward the bed, holding the envelope like it burned. His legs gave under him, his head spinning. He sat down and tore it open with both hands. Inside was a single sheet, the red government seal smeared at the corner, signed by a name he didn't know. A death certificate. Signed 3 years earlier. Place of death. Afghanistan. Cause. Shrapnel from an ambush. He read it again and again. Every word cut sharp as a blade. The pain wasn't visible, no bleeding, no wound, but the words carved straight into his mind. He was alive. He had written letters home. His survival had been confirmed at the base. But here, in his own house, sat a document declaring him dead, and no one had argued with it. No one had corrected it. At the bottom, in small print, the family is entitled to relocation assistance and compensation from the National Homefront Fund. Hesley. Michael shut his eyes. His heart hammered heavy like a blacksmith's mallet. He didn't need to run the numbers to understand. Claire had received this paper. Someone had put it in her hand. And instead of fighting it, she believed it. Not only believed it, she built her life on it. A part of him had been buried with that deadly line under the law. In the town's memory, inside the heart of the woman he loved. He opened the box again, staring at the ashes. Grey spread across the bottom. A few half-burned threads mixed in. The old wedding dress had been burned. The letter burned. Every memory that had kept him alive through the gunfire and explosions was now nothing more than the cold grit of death. He slid the paper back in the envelope and closed the box. His breath came hard, but he stayed seated on the bed, eyes fixed on the window. The sky outside had turned iron grey, the clouds sagging low. The trees twisted in the wind. Downstairs, the wall clock ticked slow. Hollow. He didn't know how long he sat there. An hour. 4. Didn't matter. The only thing real was the feeling, a quiet loss no one else could see. A wound, with no blood. Enough to make a man question if he had a place left in the world. Michael pushed himself up and stepped to the window. Out in the yard, the grass had grown to his knees. The stone path nearly swallowed. No fresh footprints. Claire hadn't walked this way in a long time. He turned his gaze to the side of the house where she used to hang laundry in the evening. The line was bare. A single wooden pin dangled like a sad relic. Everything was old. Silent. Like their marriage still standing. But burned out inside. He left the bedroom and headed down the stairs. Each step felt like a crack in the floor. Each one louder. Pushing him out of the life he once built. He drifted into the kitchen. Everything spotless. No grease marks. No tea stains on the counter. No smell of cookies. No coffee brewing. Claire had hated a kitchen that was too clean. She used to say a kitchen needed smells. Needed noise. Needed life. Now it looked more like a showroom than a place where two people once shared breakfast in silence. On the table sat a vase of dried flowers. Out of season. That detail gnawed at him. Michael picked it up and turned it over. A slip of paper was tucked underneath. Best wishes. E. H. The handwriting was slanted. Sharp. Not Claire's. He set the vase back down. Suspicion rising in his chest. This wasn't just about her. Someone else's hand was in all this. He opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was colder than he expected. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and rotting grass, the smell of a place that had once lived and was now dead. He gripped the rail with both hands. The wood was soft. Rotting. One slat already broken. Out in the yard. Claire's old swing lay toppled. Rope slack. Like the neck of someone cut down too late. He turned away. Back into the house. A faint sound stirred upstairs. Maybe footsteps. Maybe just a door easing shut. He froze. Tilted his head. Listening. Silence followed. Maybe the wind. Maybe the house closing itself tighter. Michael walked into the small study off the stairs. It used to be the room where he'd read or write letters to Claire when she was upstairs. Now it held only a bare desk. Some old newspapers. And a teacup, dried to a ring. He pulled open the bottom drawer. A stack of forms lay scattered. He pulled one free and read, an application for spousal benefits for fallen soldiers. The top right corner bore Claire's signature. Michael went still, fists clenching around the page. No excuse left. No what-ifs. Claire had filed the papers. She had signed her name under the claim that Michael was dead. She hadn't just believed the death notice. She had made it official. And she had taken the money tied to a body that never came home. From behind him, a draft slipped through, rustling the page in his hand. The front door hinges groaned again, slow, deliberate, as though someone was easing it open. Michael spun. Nothing in his grip but bitter proof. He stepped out of the study. Eyes locked on the main door. The door opened just a crack. A strip of daylight cut across the floor, and then a voice came low, uncertain, almost like a ghost. Michael? And he stood there, staring at the figure frozen in the doorway. His hand locked tight around a wedding dress he had never given. Michael stayed frozen at the doorway. The thin slice of light cutting across the dead quiet living room like a blade. The woman stood there holding a small canvas grocery bag. Her breath short. Her eyes never locking on his. She still carried the look. He remembered hair tied loose at the neck. A long brown coat worn down at the shoulders. Faded canvas shoes, but there was something in her gaze that made him take half a step back. Not out of fear, but because, for the first time, he wasn't sure the person standing there was still his wife. Claire set the bag down carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something fragile. She straightened, rubbing her hand against her coat, not to brush off dust, but as if she needed to feel something solid in that moment. Michael studied her face, thinner than he remembered. jawline sharper. Dark circles under her eyes like faint chalk marks. But no tears. No cry of his name. Just a silence rising up between two people who had once been everything to each other. He spoke first. Claire. She blinked. Gave a small nod. But didn't step closer. His eyes dropped to her hand. A ring. Yellow gold. Finely etched. The glint hit him hard. Sharp as headlights cutting through night fog. Not the worn silver band from 20 years ago. Not the plain circle they had bought at a small shop the day before the wedding. He looked closer and saw the engraving inside. R.C. His throat went dry. Not from anger, but because too many things were crumbling at once. Too fast to sort out. Claire slid her hand behind her back. But it was too late. He had seen, and she knew it. I just came from the market, she said, her voice low. Not really a greeting. Got some milk and coffee. Michael didn't answer. Not because he lacked word, but because the questions that mattered couldn't begin with milk and coffee. He stepped back. Giving her room, Claire walked in. They passed each other like strangers in a narrow hallway. She set the bag on the kitchen table, pulled out each item like she was clinging to the rhythm of an ordinary life. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, 2 apples, a packet of instant coffee. Nothing important, but each thing was a small attempt to prove she was still here. Still living. Still breathing inside a house he thought had died the moment that death notice landed. Michael sat in the wooden chair by the door. Light cut through the curtain behind him, splitting his face in 2 half-bright, half-shadow. Claire kept her back to him, her hands still fussing with the now empty bag. The kitchen doesn't look the same anymore, he said, voice low. Claire stopped. Didn't turn around. Yeah, she answered. The space between them was less than 10 feet. But it felt like 30 years. Wars. Losses. A death certificate, all of it. But the real distance had been carved out by silence. By things unsaid. By steps not taken when they should have been. What about that dress? He asked. Claire turned then. Her eyes were red. But dry. So you saw it? Michael nodded. That's not the dress you wore at our wedding. No, she said. Silence filled the room again. No dishes clinking. No radio playing. Just the wind slipping through an old window frame. I need to know. Claire, Michael said, his voice dropping lower. Who did you marry? She stood still for a breath, then gave the smallest shake of her head. Her voice came out soft, but clear. They told me you were dead. Well, Michael shut his eyes. No yelling. No fist on the table. Just a slow collapse inside. Like his heart had slipped free of the last anchor. Who were they? Who had the right to declare him gone? And how fast had she believed it? The day he was ambushed and lost contact, was that the day she began to pack away the past? How long before she slid off the old ring? How long before someone else slipped on the new? Michael stepped closer to the kitchen. Claire shifted back. Instinctive. Not out of fear, but from the habits built over too many nights spent alone. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, close enough to feel her breath. You trusted that paper? He asked, staring straight at her. Claire bit her lip. It had a signature, a seal. It was delivered in person. A soldier was with them. You could have waited. I did wait. Their eyes locked, unblinking. The words themselves weren't what drained them. It was everything beneath them. A marriage once built on trust, now reduced to 2 people trying to read which of them had let go first. Michael broke first. He pulled the yellow envelope from his pocket and laid it on the table, not pushing it toward her, just setting it down, then stepped back. Claire glanced down, lifted a corner. Her eyes skimmed the bold print. She didn't speak, just took a long breath, then pulled out a chair and sat across from him. You came back to find me, didn't you? She asked. Michael didn't reply. His eyes dropped to the table, then lifted to the ceiling. Like he half wished the rafters would cave in and end the questions neither of them could answer. "I'm not leaving," Claire said. "Whatever happened. I'm staying. In this house. With what's left." "To be with who?" he asked. Claire lowered her head. That question was heavier than jealousy. It was the core of everything. If she had stayed with another man, then what did all those nights of him clawing through combat just to make it home even mean? She slipped off the ring and laid it on the table. The metal tapped against the wood, a small sound that rang deep. "He's not you," Claire said. "He never was. But you don't know what it feels like to lose someone. Michael, you only know how to survive. I had to learn how to live." Baisan. The whole house held its breath. After a long pause, Michael stood. He didn't look back. He walked to the door, hand resting on the knob. Claire didn't call after him, and he didn't expect her to. From behind, her voice came, barely above a whisper. Like that first night they had slept in the same bed after their wedding. "I chose you," she said, "before anyone else. But when they said you were gone, I had to choose again. Not because I wanted to, because I had no other choice." "No." Michael stopped. His hand stayed on the knob, but he didn't turn. He stood there caught between two doors, one opening to a world he no longer belonged in, the other closing on a past he wasn't sure he could survive. And then, from behind him, Claire's whisper cut through the air, brushing the back of his neck like a string pulled too tight. "I didn't know you were alive." But they did. And morning in town carried a kind of false peace. The hills drifted under a low mist. The fields along the road caught a thin wash of pale sunlight on dry yellow grass. And the wind ran along the wooden fences like nothing had ever been disturbed. But inside Michael, what beat steady wasn't the wind. It was anger, cold, deep, and shaped like something he hadn't named yet. He drove slow through the west side of town, past the neat rows of houses that looked like postcards. One of them belonged to Evelyn Hayes. He remembered that place well, the red-tiled roof, the geranium pot always hanging by the front door, the smell of baking drifting out on weekends. Evelyn used to smile when she saw him, always saying, "Claire's lucky to have you." But today, his hand gripped the wheel tighter than usual, and his eyes on the house carried no warmth at all. He cut the engine, stepped out, his boots crunching down on the gravel. The front door was half shut. Michael knocked 3 times, then pushed it open. No one answered. It wasn't locked. Evelyn was in the kitchen, her back turned, hair pinned tight, a cream robe trailing down to her ankles. On the table, a coffee pot pour steady, the smell soft in the air. In any other moment, the picture might have been called domestic, but to Michael, it was nothing but sharp edges. She didn't turn, just said, "I figured you'd come." His note. He stood a beat, then stepped in. "Then you know why?" "The tree." "I do," she said, turning now, her eyes meeting his without flinch. "And I'm not surprised." And Evelyn hadn't changed much on the surface, but her eyes, once warm with kindness, were now still guarded. She pulled a chair out, sat, and motioned for him to take the one across. Michael stayed standing. "I want to know what's going on," he said, voice low, but cutting straight across the room. Evelyn poured herself more coffee, offered none. "You're dead on paper, Michael. Claire had to marry Richard to keep that house." "I? No cushion, no softening." The words hit like a hammer to his chest. "Say that again." His voice came rough. Every word weighed down. "Evelyn Schogel. You think Claire could have kept that place on her own? After the death notice came, when they froze the accounts, shut down the mortgage, no one left to hold title. You know the law. Dead men don't own property." "I? And Richard could?" Michael moved closer to the table. "You're saying she had to marry him to hold the deed?" "That's right," Evelyn said, steady, "one way or another. Richard stepped in, offered to protect the property in exchange for Claire's name on the papers. Marriage. Living arrangement. Just paperwork. But tell me, what choice did she have? And me? Michael pressed. What about the truth that I wasn't dead? A sharp laugh broke from her. Truth didn't matter anymore. Oh. Heat surged up through Michael's chest. The kind he hadn't felt since that night. The base was surrounded. When the radio cut out and men screamed for help, that never came. But this time, the fury wasn't from outside. It came from seeing someone once close to him, standing squarely on the side of silence. You knew I was alive, he said, voice strained. Didn't you? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She sipped her coffee, set it down slow, eyes never leaving his I knew a man like you doesn't go down easy, she whispered. But no one needed your survival to sign those papers. N3. Michael stepped in closer, hands flat on the table, words sharp enough to split wood. What did you do for him? Evelyn tilted her hill, narrowing her eyes. I did for Claire. I made sure she had a roof. Made sure she wasn't tossed into the cold when the checks stopped. What did you do? Michael, you sent letters. None of them ever reached her. N3. I sent them, Michael barked. Every damn one. Proof I was alive. Hasn't she? Proof means nothing if it doesn't land in her hands. Evelyn shot back. And you weren't here to see how long she was alone. Hasn't she? The air thickened, tight as a wound-up wire. Michael stepped back, fists balled. They weren't old friends anymore. They were on opposite sides of the line. One man who came back to find his home stolen, and one woman who held the keys to how it happened. And Richard, Michael said finally, voice low. What else did he want besides the house? Evelyn dropped her gaze, weighing something. Then she stood, walked to the cabinet by the window, pulled out a black leather case. She set it on the table, opened it, and pulled out a neat stack of papers. Michael looked down. He didn't need to study them long. Deed transfer. Zeller, Michael Turner. Booyah, Richard Cole. Signed 4 months after the death notice. At the bottom, a scrawled signature. His name, not his hand. Evelyn slid the papers across. You should know. Everything's clean on the books. Oh, Michael didn't touch them. He stared like he was staring at his own corpse. You signed as a witness? He asked. Evelyn gave no reply, but he saw her name in the corner, next to the notary seal. His breath came hard, knuckles white on the edge of the table. You sold me. The house. My wife. Oh, not sold? Evelyn said, her tone flat. I kept things from falling apart. Who benefited? That was the cost of survival. And Michael turned and walked out. His hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the weight of being stripped bare, not just of land, but of trust, of memory, of everything that had steadied him under fire, now erased with a forged signature. The door slammed behind him, leaving only the smell of cooling coffee and a woman who'd grown too comfortable signing other people's names. Michael sat in his old pickup, about 50 yards from the gate to Richard Cole's property. The late afternoon sky was grey, streaks of sunlight slipping through the trees and throwing long shadows across his windshield. They fell dark across the wheel. He gripped so tight, his knuckles showed white. Out in the dry fields, the wind moved through the grass, whispering like the whole town was hiding something. In front of him stood the new iron gate, black and shiny, with a tall fence running straight on both sides. Swallowing the land behind it, a brass plate bolted into a brick column read, Cole Holdings. The letters catching what little light was left in the day. A year ago. This had been open ground. People walked their dogs there. Kids rode bikes through in summer. Now it was parceled up. Water lines dug. Heavy drills running. And 4 black SUVs parked neat along the drive like they were waiting on investors. Michael shut the engine and sat still, eyes locked on the gate. He knew Richard would show. The man never let anything move without him. He had to be there, pulling the strings from the sprinklers in a garden to the names signed on a deed. Richard Cole wasn't just a businessman. He was something this town had learned to live with. Like a drought that never broke. Everybody knew it was bad. But no one had the power to stop it. He bought up land from widows and folks, too old to fight. Cleaned it. Built it up. Sold it off. But this wasn't just another plot. This was Michael's land. The piece that sat on the high ground with the underground spring, mapped years back. Ignored then, because no one had money to test it. Michael had found the old survey last week in the town office. A buddy from the county engineer's office had scribbled notes in the margin. Turns out someone had tested it now. Quietly. And was about to make it theirs. The gate swung open. A black SUV rolled in. Followed by a white pickup. Michael slid down low. Hiding behind the wheel. Through the crack of his window, he saw Richard step out. Grey suit. Polished shoes. Burgundy tie. Hair slick. That same smug smile he'd worn the day he stood at the memorial and read Michael's name, like it was just another casualty to file away. Beside him walked a woman in office clothes. Her hair pulled high. A stack of files in her hand. The two of them passed through. The gate closing heavy behind them. Michael eased his truck door open and moved along the fence line until he found a low dip where he could crouch without being seen. From there he had a view of the backlot workers staking the ground, laying pipe, jotting numbers on a whiteboard. Richard and the woman stood near the tripod where a map was pinned. Even without sound, Richard's hand gestures told enough commanding. Sure. The way a man moved when he knew the ground under his feet already belonged to him. Michael studied the map from where he crouched. The lines cut right through what used to be his property. Pipes dug along the old boundary, trenching toward the spring. They weren't just expanding. They were about to tap his water and tie it straight into their new system. A worker handed Richard a blue folder. Richard flipped it, gave a quick nod, and signed. The woman turned to the last page, tapped the margin where another signature sat. Michael squinted, leaned in. The name was faint but clear enough. Turner. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just Claire's name. They had used his too. Maybe it was the forged deed Evelyn had shoved across the table. Maybe another paper. Didn't matter. Richard was using Michael's own name to make the theft look clean. Another worker leaned close to Richard. Murmured something. Richard nodded. Turned back toward the SUV. The woman pulled out her phone. Typed, fast. Then smiled faintly. Richard spoke low into his own phone. Michael couldn't hear the words. But he didn't have to. He saw the shape of Richard's mouth. The last words. The wedding's next week. Or, Michael froze. His back stiffened like ice ran through it. That sentence was colder than any shrapnel he'd ever ducked overseas. Richard was going to marry Claire. Not a paper arrangement. Not a loophole in some contract. A wedding. A real one. He wanted to seal the deal. Land. Assets. And the woman who had once been Michael's wife. One of the men asked aloud. Will be done by Friday? Richard grinned. Nodded. Saturday's the wedding. It all has to be smooth. Michael stepped back. Each footfall heavy. Like walking through deep sand. His anger wasn't ablaze anymore. It had sunk low. Steady. Slow burning. Like fire trapped under the earth, waiting for a crack to break free. He made it back to his truck. Chest tight. Heart hammering. 1 week. Richard had given himself 1 week to finish the work. Then erase Michael for good. On paper. In the town. In Claire's life. And if that happened, there'd be no way back. He'd be a stranger forever in his own home. Michael started the truck. Turned it around. In the mirror, the iron gate closed shut behind him. Like an eyelid, cutting off the last look at something being stolen. He couldn't sit back anymore. Not while his name was being used. Not while Claire was being pulled into a marriage built on the ashes of his false death. This time, he wouldn't ask. He would dig out the truth. Or tear the whole damn town apart, trying. Nights in Havenwood seemed to fall faster since Michael had come back. Not because the sun set any earlier, but because the things he used to count on time, Loyalty no longer held their shape. After watching Richard out at the West property, Michael drove back to the old house. The lights were still off. The place looked the same, like it was refusing entry to anyone, whether the man who once owned it or the ones who had claimed it since. He didn't go in right away. He sat in the truck with the engine off, hands fixed to the wheel, like he was hanging on to something alive. Richard's words still beat in his head. The wedding's next week. Each word stamped in cold ink. Claire hadn't said a thing about it. Neither had Evelyn. But the pieces were already laid out documents. Schedules. Signatures. Some bore his own name, though not his hand. The front door opened. Claire stood there holding a thin shawl, her hair loose over her shoulders. Not the way she usually wore it. She didn't speak. Just looked at him through the dark, as if she had to decide whether the man in the truck was memory or flesh. Michael stepped out. The door closed soft behind him. He didn't need a key. Didn't need an invitation. Just her nod. Faint, but enough. She guided him in with her eyes, then stepped back, leaving him to enter like a hesitant guest. The living room sat, unchanged, silent. No radio. No background hum. Only the thin wash of light spilling from the kitchen, pale as a half moon. "I can't sleep," Claire said, her voice low and rough. "Not since you came back." "Ex?" Michael didn't answer. He leaned on the back of a chair, eyes fixed on her, her hands clenched, then opened, then clenched again, a habit to fight the tremor. "There are things you need to know," she began. He gave a small nod, letting her speak. Stories like this couldn't be dragged out. They rose on their own. Like old wounds breaking through a bandage. Claire drew a breath. "The day that letter came, I thought I'd fall apart for good. Then Evelyn showed up. She brought coffee. Words. Hugs that didn't need a reason. And then Richard. Michael stayed quiet. He told me he could help keep the house. Said if I tried to hold it in my name alone, the town would review the claim. They could seize it. Or auction it off. I believed you were gone. I had no one. And I wasn't clear-headed enough to think different." "Sorry." Michael raised his head. "So, you agreed to marry him?" Claire shook hers. Eyes remirried. "No. Not right away. I refused. But Evelyn came back. Said I had signed things wrong before. Said if I kept resisting, I could be charged with fraud. They told me I knew you were alive, but collected death benefits anyway." "Sorry." The air in the room thickened hard. Michael shot to his feet. "They told you that?" "There was a draft affidavit. Letters threatening court. I couldn't tell what was real, what was just pressure. But I couldn't fight it. All I had was this house. All I had was the Turner name. If I lost it, I wasn't anyone anymore. I'm Sekring." She walked to the old cabinet by the window, her hand shaking as she pulled out a slim file sealed in plastic. She handed it to him without meeting his eyes. Michael opened it, slid a page free. Across the top, renunciation of rights to Turner Estate. Signed, Claire Turner. Witness, Evelyn Hayes. Note at the bottom. Property transferred in full authority to third-party Richard Cole. Michael stared at it like it was a rib torn from his chest. Not for the land, for the meaning of that name Turner, a thing he thought only death itself could strip away. He looked up. Claire stood there, tears glinting but not falling. Not running to him. Not begging. She knew it had gone too far. She knew what she needed now wasn't forgiveness, but the silence of the man who had once called her wife. Michael folded the paper, slid it back into the sleeve. His eyes held on her for a long moment before he spoke. Slow and clear. "The wedding's next week." "Isn't it?" Claire stopped breathing for a beat. She didn't answer. She just looked at him like a woman about to lose the last scrap of trust. Michael turned, stepped to the door. His hand touched the knob when her voice broke from behind, sharp through the dark. "I never wore that dress, Michael. I only tried it on because they told me if I didn't, there'd be nothing left to keep." Wait one so. Rain came down in thin needles as Michael turned onto the narrow road that led to the old stone church on the edge of town. The streetlights were few and far apart, their tired yellow glow falling across the muddy road and bouncing off the streaks of water on his windshield. The sky hung heavy and grey, like the whole week had been building toward this point and was now pressing down with a cold stare from above. Michael didn't turn on the radio. He needed the sound of the engine, the wipers dragging across glass, the raw noise that kept him awake. The church sat quiet in the dark, only a single porch light burning. Stone walls slick with moss, heavy wooden doors gone pale, the overhang dripping steady. Michael parked, stepped out into the rain without a coat, and walked fast up the slick steps. He rapped 3 times on the door, then stepped back, his fists buried in his jacket pockets. After a long moment, the latch slid back. Pastor John Miller filled the doorway, hair silver and plastered to his forehead. A wool sweater tossed over his shoulders. Felt hat still on his head, though he was indoors. He looked at Michael with sleepy eyes but no surprise. No questions asked. He pulled the door open wider and stepped aside. Come in. See. Michael entered, shaking the water off his shoulders. The door closed behind him, shutting out the wind. Inside there was only the smell of damp wood and cold wax. There's coffee, Pastor John said, leading him to the back. A room that used to be for Sunday school, but now held just a few shelves and a long wooden table. A thermos sat there with 2 chipped mugs. Michael took the seat across. I'm guessing you didn't come here to pray, John said. No, Michael answered. I came for the truth. Pusley. John poured coffee, slid 1 mug across. They sat a moment. Quiet. Rain tapping out a thin rhythm on the tin roof. This church was one of the few places in town Richard Cole hadn't sunk his hands into, because churches didn't bring him profit, only guilt. Claire and Richard. Michael said, I need to know if they've been here. Pusley. Pastor John nodded slow. They were. 3 weeks back. Edja. What for? They asked to file for marriage. Edja. Michael swallowed hard. The coffee in his hand went cold at once. You want to see the book? He nodded. John rose, stepped into the next room. Metal keys jingled, the sound of a heavy cabinet opening. He came back carrying a thick, leather-bound register, worn and fading. He set it down, opened to the middle, turned it toward Michael. There it was, Claire Turner's name written in blue ink. Smooth, but firm. Underneath, Richard Cole Short. Rigid. A different hand. The line for date of ceremony was blank. The line for officiating pastor was blank. But the rest was filled. Michael stared. Something inside him cracked. Not loud. Not final, like a stone that had taken on water too long. Starting to mold from the inside. Claire write it herself? He asked. John hesitated, then shook his head. No. Richard filled in both names. Claire only signed. Isabel. And you let that stand, Michael said. Sharp. The pastor didn't flinch at the bite in his voice. He pulled a pipe from his pocket, lit it, and drew slow. I keep the book, John said, smoke curling. But I don't guard every choice this town makes. Michael. Isabel. You know they forced her. Isabel. No one said it out loud. But a man writes his own name steady. The other can't even lift her eyes. Isabel. Michael looked back down at the page. Richard Cole sat there like a blot of ink spreading across old paper, staining it for good. Claire hadn't told him about this, but now it was plain. A mark too deep to hide. You're not the first man to have his name written by someone else, John said softly, but you're the only one who came back. Michael's hands clenched tight beneath the table. Did you sign? John stayed silent. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a fountain pen, and laid it down. Next to it, the pastor's line sat blank. Someone tried to buy my silence, he said quietly, but I didn't sign. And that afternoon, It didn't rain, but the wind came down off the hills, pushing dry leaves across the drive like somebody had just walked through without leaving footprints. Michael pulled up in front of Cole's estate, a brand new white brick house with a black roof, walls solid as a bunker, a gate of iron, tall as a man. A security camera stared down from the top, but Michael didn't care. He stepped out, walked straight up, and pressed the bell. A chime echoed inside, fancy and cold. Not long after, the main door opened. The butler stood there in a grey suit, maybe 50, moving with the air of an old movie shadow. He looked Michael over from head to toe, saying nothing, just tilting his head like he was weighing whether this uninvited guest was worth admitting. "I need to see Richard," Michael said, his voice hard. The man didn't answer. He stepped aside, letting the door swing wide. Michael entered. The smell of new wood, leather, and chemical polish wrapped together. Dark furniture staged like a magazine, spread leather chairs, an electric fireplace, abstract paintings with no faces. A house built without memory. The butler led him down a long hall, their steps thudding on the wood floor like a march. At the end stood frosted glass double doors. The man knocked once, then pushed them open. Inside, Richard Cole lounged in a grey velvet chair, a glass of red wine in hand. One leg crossed, like there was no better way to spend an afternoon. Behind him, wide windows looked out on a backyard, torn up with construction plastic piping coiled, trenches carved through the dirt. Richard looked up. When he saw Michael, he wasn't surprised. "Well, the dead man returns. Have a seat," he said, stretching each word like a line in a play. Michael didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room, arms loose at his sides, but shoulders locked. His eyes stayed on the man in front of him. "I want to hear it from you," Michael said. "All of it." "Harold," Richard smiled, sipped his wine. "I've got nothing to hide. This town runs on its own laws. You died on paper. Everything you left, house, land. Even that fine wife needed someone to claim it. I just did what had to be done." "Harold, what had to be done?" Michael stepped forward. "Marrying Claire? Stealing my land? Forcing her to sign away her rights?" Richard set the glass down on a table, rose to his feet. He stood a touch taller. Not from size, but from polish, every move measured, rehearsed. "She made the smart choice," Richard said. "No one forced her. She needed a roof, needed a name to hold it. I could do that. You couldn't. Mendes, she had no choice." Michael shot back, eyes cold. "She was boxed in." "Mendes." Richard moved closer, stopping just a step away. The smile was gone, his eyes sharp. "Your name isn't on a single legal page, Michael. You're a shadow, a clerical mistake, and that mistake's been corrected." "Esfi." Michael let out a hard laugh. "Corrected by forged signatures, by fake deeds, by pushing others to sign in my place?" Richard tilted his head, like he was listening to an old story that had lost its bite. "Take it to court if you think anyone still believes you. The truth is, your death was the best thing that ever happened to Claire. She's not the quiet wife of a soldier anymore. She's a Turner about to become a Cole." But blood rose hot in Michael's neck. He didn't swing, didn't yell, just clenched his fists until the bones showed white. Outside, the wind tugged hard at the construction tarps, snapping them like mocking applause. "You think there's anything left for you to protect?" Richard pressed, his voice dropping, every word tight. "That house, it's mine now. Claire, she'll be my wife. That underground spring on your land, it'll feed the development I'm building. And you'll be a barstool story. A hero already buried." Michael took a step back. "And Pastor John? He hasn't signed. Your wedding's nothing but a half-finished show." For a second, Richard faltered. Just a second. Then he turned to the oak shelves behind him, slid open a hidden panel, and pulled out a dark wooden frame under glass. He carried it back, handed it toward Michael. "You want proof?" he said, confidence thick in his voice. Michael took it. His heart stopped a beat. Inside the frame lay a copy of his own death notice. Name: Michael Turner. Date of death: the 12th of July. Cause: missing in action. Declared KIA. Issuing authority: Department of Defense. A sharp red seal. In the corner, a faded fingerprint of some personnel officer. Richard stood there, smiling thin. "I keep it on display. A reminder that everything I have started with you." 0. Michael drove like the steering wheel was the only thing keeping him from screaming. The night wind clawed at the glass, the engine's low growl sounding like the rasp of a man choking on betrayal. Richard's words still pounded in his head. "I keep it here to remind myself, everything I have, I started with you." His death notice, framed and hung like a trophy, like a stone pressing down on his living chest. And Evelyn, she had cleared the path for it all. He swung hard onto the tree-lined street where Evelyn's house sat quiet under the maples. The porch light was off, the front door shut. No cars along the curb. Michael killed the engine. Didn't get out right away. He sat still, heart thudding not from fear but from a fever that had been burning too long. He knew there'd be no polite questions tonight. No knocking gentle. No, listening to more excuses. Either she confessed, or things went past, saving. He climbed the steps, his boots knocking against the tiles in the hollow night. The door was unlocked. He pushed it. The hinges, crying out like the house itself, hesitated to let him in. The living room was dark, but light flickered out of the kitchen. The smell hit first, sharp and acrid. Burning paper. The stink of someone wiping away their tracks. Michael strode down the hall, fists curling on their own, and there she was. Evelyn, crouched by the fireplace, hair loose, shoving a thick stack of papers into the flames. The firelight lit her pale face, and in her eyes flickered something close to regret, but not deep enough to call conscience. "Stop." Michael's voice cut through, sharp as a knife being pulled free. Evelyn jerked around, clutching the last bundle. Michael lunged, yanking it from her hands. They struggled. She was weaker, but desperation gave her strength. The paper tore in two, half falling to the rug, edges burning. Michael dropped down, smothered the flames, lifted what was left. The first line was still legible. Certificate of death, Michael Turner. Below it, a sloppy signature, Captain Henry B. Lowell, a name Michael had never heard. He scanned further. No unit code, no defense seal, just a crooked stamp, ink smeared. Fake, a forgery. Michael growled. "You signed, or you let someone sign." End quote. Evelyn staggered up, breath ragged. "I didn't have a choice. Iswell, Claire didn't have a choice. But you did. Iswell, I did it for her," Evelyn cried, voice cracking. She was falling apart. No food, no sleep, staring at the door every night. "I did whatever I had to so she could keep going. Iswell, and cashing government checks, splitting land with Richard. That's what you call keeping her alive?" Michael hurled the words like a hammer. Evelyn trembled, lips pressed shut. "Richard told me if I didn't push through the fake death papers, the house would be seized. They'd investigate Claire for fraud, drag her down to nothing. He's the prop. You let him push her under instead of pulling her up." Michael stepped closer. "And now you're burning the evidence. He's the prop. I had to protect myself. He's the prop, and bury me along with it. He's the prop." Evelyn broke then. No sound, just her shoulders shaking, her body folding as if the weight finally landed. "You think I don't hurt?" Michael pressed on, voice low, steady. "You think I wanted to come home to find my wife ready to marry a man like Richard? My land turned into an irrigation field? You think I wanted to see my own death certificate hanging like some prize?" Evelyn slumped on the floor, eyes cast down. Michael's breath came harsh, his heart pounding. In that moment, He didn't know what he wanted, her confession, a swing of his fist, or some miracle to rewind time. Outside, the wind slapped the windows. Inside, the fire threw up sparks, ash falling slow. Michael crouched, pulling charred scraps from the hearth. Some pages still carried words, survey maps, water drill diagrams, land transfer deeds, Richard's name on them all, and scribbled notes on a few, for R.C. Urgent. Auntie, Evelyn muttered, voice broken, drifting into delirium. I thought he just wanted the land, but then he said he'd marry Claire, said he'd change her life. I thought it was right. Is it? Right for who? Michael asked. She looked up. Is rough. For me? Oh, one. Michael stepped back. His stare emptied out. You don't know what you've stepped into. Evelyn suddenly screamed, her face twisted, eyes wild. Richard will crush you. The rain came close to midnight. Wind thrashing the pines against the eaves. Thunder rolling like distant war drums. Michael stayed awake, sitting alone in the living room. His old sidearm laid on the table, not out of any plan for violence, but as a reminder he would not be erased again. After Evelyn, after Richard, the pieces were lined up, and he knew if Richard Cole had a last card to play, he'd play it tonight. The judge's gavel cracked just past noon. Richard Cole was convicted on 4 counts: property fraud, falsifying public records, conspiracy to seize state-level water rights, and coercion into marriage to cover unlawful assets. The sentence: 18 years. In the room, no one clapped. There were no cheers. Only the quiet sound of justice laying one stone back where it had belonged all along, on a road bent too long. That afternoon, Michael and Claire drove back to the house on the Turner land, the home that had been erased, stolen, and now restored after so much loss. The porch still smelled damp from the week's storm, with a few gouges left from the fight that hadn't yet been patched. But it was still their porch. They sat there shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the stretch of land rolling to the horizon, where wild grass was already starting to grow again. Claire held a small jar in her hands. Inside was ash, the remnants of the old wedding dress she had nearly worn the day she was forced to ward Richard. She didn't speak for a long while. Only when the wind moved soft across the porch did she whisper, almost afraid of her own voice, I just want to wear the dress you gave me, even if it's nothing but ashes now. And Michael turned, slid an arm around her shoulder. He didn't answer. He just sat with her, letting the hours drag. Some griefs can't be spoken away. They only ask that someone remain. The sun dropped behind the ridges. Birds began chattering in the brush. Claire rose and walked inside, leaving Michael alone on the porch. He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred from war and bare-knuckle fights. He had once believed he'd never feel a place belong to him again. But here, on the land nearly stolen, beside the woman nearly lost, he felt something knitting back together. When Claire returned, she carried 2 mugs of tea. They clinked them together without words. Not toast, just a nod. Soft but sure. We'll live. We'll hold on. We won't let anyone erase the Turner name again. That night, with yellow light spilling out of the kitchen, they were cleaning the old bookshelves when the doorbell rang. Michael froze. Claire looked at him. They weren't expecting anyone. He stepped out, opened the door. No one stood there. Just a square parcel on the step. No return name. He lifted it heavy enough to stir curiosity, light enough not to scare him. He set it on the table, cut the tape. Inside lay a bridal veil, ivory fading toward yellow with age, still soft as the day it was first folded. Beside it, a folded note in black ink. The slanted hand unmistakable. The story isn't over. See, Claire came to his side. Her eyes widened when she saw the veil, her hands trembling. This was my mother's. She guarded it all her life. Never let anyone hold it. Not even me. Michael's grip tightened on the note. Evelyn. The room went silent again. But this time it wasn't pain. It was the sharp quiet of instinct. The sense that, though one battle had closed its shadow, hadn't lifted. Evelyn, the woman they thought had slipped away into darkness, still had one move left. Michael sat back, staring at the veil spread on the table, its fabric catching the light in a way that felt both tender and ominous. Beside him, Claire touched the edge, her breath uneven. The house creaked as the night settled in, the old beams shifting, the land outside dripping with spring thaw. He knew what this meant. Justice had been won in the courtroom. But justice in the world was never that clean. Evelyn still held a thread in her hand, and she had just tugged it, reminding them both that the past had ways of reaching forward. Michael looked at Claire. Whatever comes, we face it together. She nodded, her fingers still brushing the veil, as if trying to draw strength from the fabric her mother once kept close. The story of Michael Turner wasn't finished. It had only turned a page. Some battles aren't fought overseas or on the front lines. They happen inside our own homes, where people get fooled by papers stamped in red and silences that were never innocent. Michael's story reminds us that justice doesn't walk in on its own. It has to be carried forward by someone willing to stand up, even if it's late. For those of us who find ourselves somewhere in the middle of life, holding on to truth and decency is the only way not to be washed away from who we are. Sometimes, the most precious thing we can keep isn't land, or titles, or what people think belongs to us. It's a single whisper that manages to survive after everything else has burned down. And if the story isn't finished yet, that means we still have a choice left to do the right thing. After all the schemes, the lies, the betrayals, what remains is a soldier who came back quietly, who sat on the porch beside the woman everyone thought was gone. No grand speeches, no attempt to drag the past back into the room, just two people sitting still, watching the wind move through the old trees, knowing that this time nothing could separate them again. Not a forged signature, not a false seal, not the machinery of people who try to write them out of their own life. That's maybe the simplest victory a man who has lived through war can hope for: to live honestly, to love honestly, and to hear his own name spoken rightly in his own home. I think about that, and it sits heavy in the chest. But in a good way, a reminder that what really matters can't always be measured or signed for. It's not written on paper. It's lived day by day, choice by choice. Michael wasn't fighting for a deed or a piece of property in the end. He was fighting for a place where he could belong again, where love wasn't a contract, but a truth. That's the part of his story that will stick, because it belongs to all of us who've ever lost something that seemed too far gone. Maybe you've been there yourself. Maybe you've lost a loved one, or a home, or even lost your way through those hard years when everything felt like it was slipping. If you have, you know the silence that follows, the kind that eats at you more than any sound. And maybe you know what it means to grab onto even the smallest sign that not everything's gone, that you're still here, still counted, still allowed to come home. So if you've lived through something like that, I want to ask you, share it. Down in the comments, tell us about the time you lost someone, or something, or even yourself. Because maybe, just maybe, somebody else out there is sitting in their own quiet, waiting for a story like yours to help them find their way back. And that's the power of Michael's story. It isn't about winning some court case or seeing a man like Richard Cole hauled off in cuffs. It's about the stillness that follows. The way a man can sit again on his own porch, hold the hand he thought he'd never touch, and finally breathe in a world where his name belongs to him again. That's healing. That's the kind of homecoming a soldier dreams of, not the parade, not the cheers, but the chance to sit in silence with the person who knows him best, knowing that this time, no paper and no silence will ever take that away.